The key of accountability. Accountability is critical for us as humans, especially in the journey of transformational lifestyle change, because it acts as a motivation, and it can act as a midwife, so to speak, between initial early lifestyle changes and those that have transitioned and have established new long-term habits and behaviors, and may still play a role in the long run, but may switch from being more external to more internal. So let's take a look at an example of someone who made such a transition. There you have Jack LaLanne. If you don't know Jack LaLanne was a guru of fitness and health throughout the 50s, 60s, and living a life of almost 100 years in length. And around 97 years of age, just prior to his 97th birthday, he passed away, working out till the day before he died. But note, his father died of a heart attack in his 50s. And Jack, as a teenager, was a self-professed sugar addict, a junk food addict, as he would say, who needed support. He needed external coaching. He had, for instance, Dr. Bragg and others that helped guide him towards him becoming ultimately an internally accountable person. For example, much later in his life, his wife recounted a story where Jack was in a town that he was not aware of. He was either maybe giving a motivational talk or possibly promoting one of his products. And he could not find a gym to exercise at. And he became visibly frustrated. And that visible frustration spilled over to his wife, who got frustrated until she ultimately and finally said, "Jack, damn it, why don't you just skip today? Nobody's going to know." And you can imagine someone internally accountable like Jack quickly, without even thinking, said, "I'll know." So by that point in his life, he didn't require any external accountability. He became accountable to himself. And ultimately, while that's a very compact way of looking at someone's long lifestyle and lifestyle journey trajectory, we hope it makes the point. There essentially are two types of accountability, if you want to think about it in a way that gets us in the right mindset, in the right mind frame. External, things like coaching, programs, tracking, and then ultimately internal, which is really a mindset that it is important to you and that you're accountable to yourself, as reflected by that story of Jack LaLanne. So why external accountability, particularly in the beginning of the process, right? You've heard the saying, old habits die hard. Well, that means that probably going to need some support to crack through that hard shell. External motivation is typically needed, or certainly people benefit substantially from, at least initially. Now think about the process. I want you to really think about this closely, because there's a point I'm going to need to make here that will help you be different than the average person trying to change their lifestyle, because you'll have knowledge and insight that will shepherd you through a process that most people end up just petering out and failing. It starts with, yes, lifestyle journey began with risky, if comforty, but still risky, old habits that die hard. There's a motivation, whatever that may be, your why, whatever drove you to say that's it, enough's enough. You now start to engage in healthy new behaviors. We've been talking about a lot of those. That's great. You keep them up long enough and they'll become new habits, but fragile habits. Okay? You're doing new behaviors, they're not really habits yet, and then they become new habits. Even then, when you have new habits that are less than 2 years old, for instance, they're relatively fragile. I want you to think of a wall, like you've built this beautiful wall with beautiful brick and cement in between each of these beautiful bricks, and it looks strong, but you know that cement is not cured yet. If you got up close to it and you pushed hard enough, you could push that wall right down. It looks strong, but it hasn't cured yet. That is what you're in when you have these new habits. They're feeling like there's some momentum, but it hasn't been at least 2 years of maintaining. Because if you're to look at good evidence on long-term successful lifestyle changes, for instance, from the National Weight Control Registry, it typically takes 2 years of maintenance before the odds of long-term success begin to greatly increase. To put in plain language, before things are really on autopilot, before that beautiful structure that you built, cement, now is cured, and it truly are healthy old habits. They take time. How do you get to old habits? You want to have old habits die hard is great. If they're healthy, old habits, how long does it take to become old? Typically 2 years. So don't let your guard down. That fragile phase when habits seem stronger than they really are, that's a trap zone. And I want you to be careful, to be humble about that. Support and tracking and coaching and program in some way, shape, or form may very well be necessary throughout that time period, unless you're very lucky and you have very good support in other key areas in terms of environmental support, for instance, social support. You might have, in fact, just had the kids move out of the house so you don't have the saboteurs there anymore. Not that they intended to be saboteurs. Maybe so. In that case, you might be able to not have as much of a requirement for external accountability, but for most of us, it is particularly beneficial through much longer than what people think. Lifestyle change is not a 3-month program and that's it. As we've already mentioned, the National Weight Control Registry, maintenance. Now think about that, it's maintenance. So if you have a significant lifestyle change and over 6 months you have really transformed your metabolic health, your blood pressure, your insulin, your blood sugar levels, your cholesterol, your weight is improved, that point that you've achieved that, let's say it's 6 months from point 0, that's when the clock starts ticking on the 2 years of maintenance. That's when the clock starts ticking. So it's, you say 2.5 years at least of total before you get to where the odds of long-term success greatly increase for a population. You may be an exception, but I'd be very careful about that. We see all kinds of examples of exceptions out there, but they're very few and far between and amplified far more than the typical and more common journey that all of us go through, which is one that requires some support, usually for a significant period of time. So again, whether it's a program that is structured like this, that might involve some one-on-one coaching, devices, tracking devices, apps like Lose It, MyFitnessPal, Chronometer, all of these can work together to help reprogram behaviors. And I want to give you an example here. Remember, when we're talking about new behaviors, we're talking about literal brain structure change, microanatomical changes in neurons or nerves of the brain and their communications and our thoughts. Therefore, TLC, or transformational, or if you will, therapeutic lifestyle change, either word works for the T, is brain surgery without a knife. It is serious stuff. You can't just hack through it. It takes time. Let me give you some examples. What a phenomenal story Romaine is. When first seeing me in clinical practice, was full-blown type 2 diabetic with obviously a dramatic amount of excess weight, basically largely fixed to a couch. She made it to the picture that you see on the left, but she was relatively immobile. It was years. We were probably have now worked together ultimately for, I think, a total of 4 years, maybe 5, until I felt confident enough that, and she felt confident enough that she really had it down, particularly as her husband started to get involved and really start to want to jump on the journey more fully with her. And look how life has opened up for her in this regard. I mean, it was going from bedroom to couch to bathroom to couch, kitchen, etc. And now you see the picture of her on a beautiful cruise and traveling. Now, is life all happy-go-lucky and that? No, everyone's life has challenges. But is there a significant improvement by investing what is really a short period of time, even 4 years, compared to the 40-plus years it took her to get to where she was at, is a dot in time, worth every minute. Another example of improved metabolic health with long-term coaching. Maybe not as much of a dramatic weight change. Josh didn't have that as his major metabolic issue, more in terms of cholesterol, for instance. But clearly there was a change in the process of a year working together, and there are some very interesting outcomes here in regards to improving his health, and accountability was his most notable key, as you'll see in a moment. And Josh, who's a very successful businessman, has made a lot more money by improved mental acuity, mental energy, and his business has garnered up to 7 digits more over the year of working on his metabolic health and coaching. So an investment well worth every penny. Josh came up with an interesting thought in the process, and as he's tracking his food and he's sending me his daily food logs as a high-end client for one-on-one coaching, and he came up with something called Josh's 10 to 300 choice. In other words, he could have some kind of fast food, and he travels a lot, so he could just do it kind of mindlessly and have some fast food and feel good for about 10 minutes and then feel like crap for 300 minutes, if we're going to use his words. Or he could have 10 minutes where maybe the palatability wasn't as hyper-palatable. And remember, hyper-palatable might seem nice, but it's also a risk. But then after that, he would feel great and just ready to strike out, and he does phenomenal work, keynote speaking, and just perform way better, get higher impact results, and get more business. Now, in a closing thought to this opening lesson on accountability, I want to give you a picture of a transitional lifestyle change success story. Josh is in his transition zone. He's now, at the time of this filming, about 1 year now into the real optimal metabolic health. So he did his 6 months, then there's 1 year, now he's looking at probably another year. And we asked him what was really truly established now. What were habits that were just now really starting to at least feel, even though it's 1 year, that they're really just autopilot. Almost no matter where he was in the world, they really just become more rock solid. Well, he said, good question. What's number one? I'm pretty solid on tracking and accountability. And he loved tracking. I'm not saying you have to track food, but for him, using the Lose It app and tracking was a critical component to his health. So for him, accountability was just a really key issue. It did not mean that other keys weren't important. He absolutely benefited from Mind Matters and obviously learning about nutrition, and calorie density, etc. Physical activity has improved, and you'll see some comments in that regard. But accountability, not for everyone, is it the number one key. Many people, it's Mind Matters, for instance, but it's almost a important issue, I should say. It is an important issue for everybody as far as accountability goes, and for some, it's really the most important. And especially when you have a compassionate type of understanding accountability that comes with the process. Number two, he said movement remains strong, right? So even in his happy place land, that's where he will go to have some pleasure and joy and take a break from his his hardcore work schedule place in Florida. Still, even in that happy place where he's trying to take a break from being rigid and so forth, he finds that exercising is now part of his joy. He does the hunger scale, Mind Matters, right? So as I told you that all the keys are important. I just wanted to point out accountability was that high up there. But they all work together. The hunger scale, he doesn't starve, he doesn't stuff, generally speaking, right? And therefore it ends up not eating after dinner because he's no longer hungry. Notice number 5, almost no mindless eating, showing humanity. We're all humans. Once in a while, we're going to get involved in some mindless eating. Look, don't sweat it. Don't go to that diet mentality. But almost no mindless eating doesn't mean he doesn't have some indulgences, as he says. Now, when I eat a slice of pizza, it's deliberate. And then, of course, Mind Matters. He now has a mindset of viewing himself as a healthy, now in-shape person who embraces a healthy but practical lifestyle and feels in control of it. Right? And he said, of course, there's probably more. but there are some long-term, deep-rooted practices at this point for sure, and thanks to him too, thanks to my accountability to you, he adds. So those are the basics when it comes to accountability. External accountability to a program, to a coach, to tracking, really helpful, particularly in that early phase. And our ultimate goal is to get you to where you are more internally accountable, like Jack LaLanne, in which there would be no need for someone to be helping coach you through because you have become your own coach, learning a system that works, and whenever anyone asks as to why you're doing something, you say, I'm doing it for me because I'll know. Thank you.